All right, class, settle down. Settle down. Today we're going to talk about one of the most famous images in all of American history. That's right, the Boston Tea Party. Now, if you've had the privilege of being taught about this in school, you probably remember learning that some number of chests of tea were dumped into Boston, harbored by a group of brave patriots who were upset about taxation without representation. And that is mostly true, except for the part where we don't really know how many chests of tea were dumped into the harbor. There was a law passed by the British government in 1773 that granted the East India Company a monopoly on the sale of tea in America. Samuel Adams looked out on the harbor and saw the ships carrying the hated tea. He said, "There are the ships. Die." These affidavits, along with other contemporary accounts, are the basis for the commonly cited number of 342. However, there are a few problems with using these sources to determine the number of chests of tea that were actually dumped and wasted in the province of Massachusetts Bay from the year 1773 to 1783, written by someone called J.R. Pohl. No fewer than 4 of the men involved in the Boston Tea Party claimed to have destroyed between 9 and 10 chests of tea each. And when you add those numbers up, you get 342. Mr. Kling, on the other hand, claimed to have destroyed only 1 chest. Clearly, some of the men involved in the Boston Tea Party were lying, but not necessarily to historians. If they had 3,000 chests of tea on board, we would find a use for them. For another, the men involved had a vested interest in making sure that the number of chests of tea they dumped looked impressive. And what better way to do that than to inflate the numbers just a little bit? As it turns out, they found a use for 342 chests of tea, give or take. This act, which had nothing to do with taxes, was intended to bail out the struggling company, not punish the colonists. In the end, the Boston Tea Party was about so much more than tea. It was about sending a message to the British government that the colonists would not be taxed without representation. What better way to send a message than by dumping 342 chests of tea into the harbor? But the colonists, it seemed, didn't much care about the financial troubles of 18th century Britain's answer to Walmart. The story goes that on December 16, 1773, 9 men disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 merchant ships anchored in Boston Harbor and proceeded to dump 342 chests of tea owned by the British East India Company into the water. Now, why they chose to do this rather than, say, just burn the tea on the docks or drink it? Well, that's a question for another time. But suffice it to say, these men wanted to make a statement, and by George, did they make a statement. According to an eyewitness, a Mr. John Tainter, the men came from different social classes, but they were all united in their opposition to the Tea Act. In fact, on the night of the Tea Party, as one of the men who would later become known as the Sons of Liberty. And while we may never know exactly how many chests were dumped that night, what we do know is that the men involved went to great lengths to keep track. According to an account written by Thomas Kling, another one of the men involved in the protest. After the tea was dumped into the harbor, the men rowed back to the mainland, each man taking a chest with him as a trophy. They then met up with the rest of the Sons of Liberty, who were so pleased with the destruction of the tea that they held a huge party for everyone involved. As proof of their deed, each of the men involved signed an affidavit swearing to the number of chests of tea that they had destroyed. For one thing, the affidavits were written years after the event took place, and there is no way to verify their accuracy. In fact, according to a book called The Real Amount of Tea Consumed, as it turns out, the number of chests of tea they dumped might have been less important to them than the symbolic message they were sending. All right, class, that's our American history lesson for today. I hope you enjoyed it. You can subscribe.